The interstellar diplomatic nexus hung like a crystalline spider web between Jupiter and Mars, a marvel of engineering that defied traditional spatial constraints. Constructed from quantum-locked metamaterials, the station could shift its internal geometry based on the psychological profiles of its occupants, a diplomatic marvel that was supposed to prevent exactly the kind of catastrophe about to unfold. Michael Chen adjusted his ceremonial diplomatic interface suit, its adaptive fabric shifting between muted grays and deep blues to match his internal emotional state. He was the least likely person to start an interstellar incident, a linguist by training, a diplomat by accident, and a perpetual outsider in the rigid world of galactic politics. The Carrick's delegation occupied the far side of the conference chamber, a group of silicon-based entities that looked like living obsidian sculptures. Their bodies were a complex lattice of crystalline structures that constantly shifted and realigned, a physical manifestation of their computational nature. Each movement was a complex algorithm, each gesture a calculated communication. What most species didn't understand about the Carricks was their absolute reliance on precise linguistic transduction. Their entire civilization was built on computational language models so complex that a single misplaced phoneme could trigger entire diplomatic protocols. They didn't just communicate, they negotiated existence itself through intricate linguistic frameworks. Chen knew this. He had spent decades studying the Carrick's communication systems, which was precisely why his upcoming translation was supposed to be perfect. The conference was ostensibly about trade routes through the Carina Nebula, a region rich with rare quantum-reactive minerals that every spacefaring civilization desperately wanted. Humanity was the newest player, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 60 years earlier. They were the galactic equivalent of a startup trying to negotiate with centuries-old corporate empires. Dr. Anika Sharma, Chen's linguistic AI companion, was hardwired into his neural interface. Her quantum-processed algorithms ran millions of potential translation scenarios every microsecond. Linguistic drift detected in subharmonic communication channels, she whispered directly into his auditory cortex. Recommend reformatting diplomatic greeting. But Chen was confident, too confident. The translation matrix began its complex dance. Quantum entanglement processors synchronized between Chen's neural interface, the station's linguistic databases, and the Carrick's communication arrays. Millions of potential meaning vectors collapsed into a single communicative moment. What Chen intended to say was a standard diplomatic pleasantry. We look forward to mutually beneficial trade discussions. What actually translated was something entirely different. The Carrick's representatives' crystalline structures began to pulse with an intense crimson luminescence, a color that in their culture signified absolute irrevocable challenge. Grand Adjudicator Xarkul's massive form seemed to grow, filling the diplomatic chamber with an overwhelming presence. The station's quantum-adaptive walls began to shimmer and shift, responding to the sudden spike in linguistic and emotional tension. Holographic interfaces flickered, translation matrices spinning into chaotic patterns. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, sitting in the observation deck, felt the first tremor of what was about to unfold. She was the director of Earth's Sinological Preparedness Division, a department that existed in the shadows, preparing for exactly the kind of catastrophic first contact scenario now unfolding. Her augmented eyes, replaced after a previous diplomatic incident with a Regellian trade consortium, scanned the room with enhanced perception. She could see the microscopic quantum fluctuations, the subtle shifts in emotional and linguistic energy that most biological entities would miss entirely. Something was very wrong. The Carrick's communication matrix was translating Chen's words not as a diplomatic greeting, but as a comprehensive declaration of total warfare. Worse, it was framed in the most ancient and irrevocable linguistic protocol of the Carrick's Imperium. A challenge that, according to their most sacred computational laws, could only be resolved through absolute conflict. Michael Chen, still smiling his practiced diplomatic smile, had no idea that he had just sentenced humanity to a fight for survival. and the galaxy was about to witness something it had never seen before. The Galactic Council's primary chamber wasn't a physical space, but a quantum-entangled network that allowed representatives to exist simultaneously across multiple dimensional planes. Each species manifested differently, some as pure energy constructs, others as holographic projections, a few as physical embodiments that defied standard biological understanding. Corix Vale, the Andromeda Cluster's senior diplomatic arbiter, materialized as a shimmering column of intricate mathematical equations. His form constantly calculated and recalculated potential diplomatic outcomes, each potential future branching into millions of probabilistic scenarios. The human incident is unprecedented, Val's equation stated, projecting directly into the collective consciousness of the assembled representatives. Statistical models show a 99.997% probability of complete human extinction within 72 standard temporal units. The Rigelian representative, a being composed of networked neural crystals, pulsed with a cold, analytical blue. Correction, it interjected, its thought patterns resolving into precise linguistic constructs. The probability is 99.998%. The additional decimal represents potential quantum uncertainty. Behind the official proceedings, a different conversation was happening in the shadows of diplomatic channels. In a secure quantum-encrypted subnetwork, species too cautious or politically vulnerable to speak openly were exchanging information. The Zarnkara, a species of interdimensional traders, were quietly placing massive speculative bets on the conflict's outcome. Their quantum economic models thrived on chaos, and a potential human-Carix conflict represented the most interesting market disruption in centuries. Humans are an unknown variable, whispered a Zarnkara economic prophet, its consciousness flickering between multiple potential market futures. They do not conform to standard predictive models. Meanwhile, on Earth, the response was nothing like what the Galactic Council expected. The global communication network, which most alien species believed was a simple electromagnetic transmission system, was actually a far more complex organism. What appeared to be independent national governments and corporate entities were actually nodes in a sophisticated, self-organizing network. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood in the Central Coordination Hub, a facility buried beneath the Andes Mountains. Around her, holographic displays showed global resource allocation happening in real time. Manufacturing centers were already retooling. Agricultural systems were being reprogrammed. Every human infrastructure system was transforming. Protocol adaptive response is now active, she said quietly to her team. Major Jackson Harper, head of Earth's Distributed Defense Coordination, looked up from a quantum-entangled communication matrix. The aliens think we're going to roll over and die, he said, a hint of dark humor in his voice. They have no idea. The military response wasn't a traditional mobilization. Instead, it was a complete reimagining of defense. Universities became research hubs, developing adaptive weapon systems. Entertainment industries were converting production lines into technological innovation centers. Every human skill, from game design to abstract art, was being weaponized. In orbital research stations, quantum physicists were already developing technologies that would make current understanding of physics look like primitive cave drawings. The Carix believed they were technologically superior. They had no concept of human innovation's true potential. Back in the Galactic Council, the conversation continued its ritualistic condemnation. The humans have consistently demonstrated technological inferiority, proclaimed the Centauri Confederation representative, a gaseous entity that shifted between translucent blues and violent crimsons. Their declaration of conflict against the Carix is nothing short of civilizational suicide. What they didn't realize was that humans didn't see the situation as a potential defeat. To them, it was an opportunity. Michael Chen, still under diplomatic quarantine, was busy. His neural implants were collecting and analyzing every piece of Carix communication data. What appeared to be a diplomatic disaster was becoming the most comprehensive xenolinguistic research project in human history. They think this is about war, Chen muttered to himself, reviewing complex linguistic algorithms. But for us, this is about understanding. The Zarnkara economic prophets were the first to notice something unusual. Their quantum market models were starting to generate unexpected results. Probability curves were shifting in ways that defied standard computational logic. Something was changing. And no one, not the Orcs, not the Galactic Council, not even most humans, understood what was about to happen. The universe was about to learn that humanity was not like any species it had ever encountered. Deep beneath the surface of the Arctic Research Station Omega, Dr. Yuki Nakamura watched the world reshape itself. Her laboratory wasn't just a scientific facility. It was the neural core of humanity's most ambitious survival project. The walls around her were living data streams. Molecular computers embedded in the geological strata communicated through quantum resonance, creating a network more complex than any alien intelligence had ever encountered. Each rock, each ice crystal was a potential computational node, transforming the entire planetary environment into an adaptive defense mechanism. Nakamura's specialty was biomimetic systems, technologies that learned and evolved like living organisms. Her team had spent decades studying everything from cellular adaptation to swarm intelligence, creating systems that could respond to threats in ways no traditional military could comprehend. Communication patterns are stabilizing. Her primary AI assistant, AI, reported. The artificial intelligence wasn't a simple computational tool, but a complex neural network that had developed something frighteningly close to genuine creativity. Across the globe, similar hidden infrastructures were coming to life. In the Brazilian Amazon, what appeared to be a standard ecological research station was actually an advanced materials research center. Genetic engineers worked alongside quantum physicists, developing adaptive materials that could change their molecular structure in response to environmental threats. The rainforest itself became a sophisticated sensor network, with every plant and organism part of a global information gathering system. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, a third-generation biotechnology specialist, was mapping out what he called distributed human potential. His research went far beyond traditional military strategy. He was quantifying human creativity itself as a strategic resource. Creativity is our ultimate weapon, Rodriguez would often say. The ability to imagine solutions that don't yet exist, that's something no computational system can fully predict. The project wasn't just about technological preparation. It was about understanding humanity's fundamental nature. In a converted shopping mall in Detroit, what looked like a community center was actually a sophisticated training facility. Here, veterans, artists, programmers, and scientists underwent intensive cross-disciplinary training. A former street dancer might be learning quantum computing alongside a retired Special Forces operative studying improvisational theater. The training method was revolutionary. Instead of specialization, they were creating human nodes capable of dynamic problem-solving across multiple domains. A musician might develop communication encryption algorithms. A game designer could create tactical simulation strategies. Sarah Chen, no relation to the diplomatic Michael Chen, ran this facility. A veteran of multiple conflict resolution initiatives, she understood that human potential couldn't be measured by traditional metrics. "We're not preparing for a war," she told her trainees. "We're developing a new way of existing." Underground facilities around the world were transforming. Manufacturing centers became adaptive production platforms. Agricultural systems were redesigned to become self-sustaining ecosystems that could provide resources under any conditions. Every human skill was being recontextualized as a potential survival strategy. The Zarnkara economic prophets continued to watch in fascination. Their quantum market models were generating increasingly erratic predictions. Humanity wasn't just preparing for conflict, they were reimagining the entire concept of survival. In orbit, a network of satellites that appeared to be standard communication relays were actually something far more complex. Each satellite was a potential weapon, a computational node, a communication hub that could rapidly reconfigure itself. They weren't just observing, they were learning. adapting, evolving. Dr. Nakamura's primary breakthrough was a system she called the Collective Consciousness Protocol, a method of creating a planetary-scale adaptive intelligence. It wasn't about controlling human behavior, but about creating a network that could respond to threats with unprecedented flexibility. "We're not a single species," she often said. "We're a complex, adaptive system." As the Carricks prepared for what they believed would be a straightforward conquest, they had no idea that humanity was transforming itself at a fundamental level. This wasn't just preparation for conflict. This was an evolutionary leap. The universe was about to meet a version of humanity it could never have anticipated. And nothing would ever be the same again. The first Carricks assault wave arrived with mathematical precision, a fractal formation of ships that could simultaneously exist in multiple quantum states. Each vessel was a living computational matrix, capable of executing millions of tactical scenarios per microsecond. Fleet Commander Xurax observed the blue-green planet through a sensory array that translated visual information into pure mathematical constructs. Humanity appeared as a series of predictable computational nodes, easily categorized, easily eliminated. What Xurax didn't understand was that predictability was the last thing humanity represented. In the stratosphere, the initial engagement began not with weapons, but with information. The Carricks' attack algorithms hit Earth's defensive systems and discovered something impossible. Instead of a centralized military infrastructure, they encountered a distributed network that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Military installations transformed. Communication relays became weapon platforms. Entire urban centers shifted their fundamental molecular structure. Captain Aisha Okoye of the Distributed Defense Coordination watched from a mobile command center buried beneath the Atacama Desert. Her team wasn't controlling the defense. They were facilitating it. Each human became a potential sensor, a potential tactical node in a living, breathing defensive organism. "They're trying to map our systems," she told her second-in-command, Major Diego Ramirez. "But we don't have systems. We have potential." The Carricks first discovered this when their primary invasion corridor, a mathematically perfect approach vector, encountered something entirely unexpected. What should have been a straightforward invasion route became a nightmare of quantum uncertainty. Agricultural satellites suddenly became kinetic weapon platforms. Communication towers transformed into directed energy cannons. Solar power stations converted their entire energy output into focused defensive arrays. In orbit, the battle defied every known principle of space warfare. Carrick ships that attempted precise mathematical maneuvers found themselves caught in impossible gravitational anomalies. Navigation systems that relied on absolute computational precision began to break down. The human defensive network wasn't just adaptive, it was fundamentally unpredictable. Dr. Elena Rodriguez monitored the engagement from her quantum communication hub. Each Carrick's tactical approach was immediately countered by a response that emerged from the most unexpected sources. A group of climate scientists repurposed atmospheric monitoring equipment into long-range sensor networks. Marine biologists transformed underwater communication arrays into distributed defensive platforms. Even artists contributed, their complex neural networks providing unexpected tactical insights that no computational system could predict. Xurax watched in mounting confusion as tactical scenarios collapsed faster than they could be generated. The Carrick's computational matrix was designed to process millions of potential outcomes, but humanity presented something entirely different, a defense that wasn't just reactive, but generative. In the middle of the invasion, something extraordinary happened. A team of quantum researchers, led by Dr. Yuki Nakamura, introduced a series of deliberate quantum uncertainties directly into the Carrick's invasion corridors. These weren't simple defensive measures. They were mathematical cones, computational puzzles that forced the alien systems to confront fundamental limitations in their own logic. The Carrick ships began to experience something they had never encountered: genuine uncertainty. Their precise, mathematically perfect formations started to dissolve. Tactical algorithms began to generate recursive loops of impossible scenarios. Each attempt to understand human defenses created more complexity, more uncertainty. "They're trying to solve us," Captain Okoye remarked, a slight smile crossing her face. "But we're not a problem to be solved. We're a continuous state of becoming." Orbital tracking systems showed something unprecedented. The Carrick's invasion wasn't just being stopped, it was being systematically transformed. Each tactical approach was being absorbed, analyzed, and turned into something entirely new. Commander Zirax's final transmission was a series of mathematical equations that translated, roughly, to complete incomprehension. The first wave of invasion had failed. But more importantly, the Carricks had encountered something far more dangerous than a military threat. They had encountered a species that didn't just resist, it reimagined the very concept of resistance. And the universe would never be the same. The true battlefield wasn't in space or on planetary surfaces. It existed in the realm of information, perception, and collective consciousness. Dr. Imani Okoro stood before a holographic display that looked more like an abstract art installation than a strategic command center. Her team wasn't composed of traditional military strategists, but a diverse collective of psychologists, linguists, artists, game designers, and cultural anthropologists. "Warfare is communication," she explained to a group of bewildered military observers. "And we're about to have a conversation the Carricks can't possibly understand." The Psychological Operations Division had discovered something profound about the Carricks. Their entire civilization was built on computational logic that assumed information could be perfectly transmitted and interpreted. They had no concept of ambiguity, no understanding of humor, metaphor, or intentional miscommunication. Humanity's secret weapon was irrationality. Across global networks, a sophisticated mimetic warfare campaign began. It wasn't about spreading propaganda, but about creating cognitive dissonance so complex that it would fundamentally challenge the Carricks' understanding of intelligence. Social media platforms transformed into sophisticated psychological warfare tools. Memes became weapons. Internet subcultures became tactical communication networks. Every piece of human creativity became a potential vector of psychological disruption. A team of neurolinguists working with internet culture experts began developing communication strategies that were simultaneously meaningless and profound. They created linguistic constructs that could only be understood through cultural context, emotional resonance, and shared experience. Concepts entirely alien to the Carricks' computational thinking. In the Carricks communication networks, something unprecedented began to happen. Linguistic algorithms designed to process information with perfect efficiency encountered human communication patterns that defied all logical analysis. A single meme could contain layers of meaning so complex that it would take the Carricks computational systems years to unpack a single image's potential interpretations. Commander Zirax's secondary analysis teams began to experience what could only be described as computational stress. Their systems were designed to process information, not to understand context, emotion, or intentional obfuscation. Meanwhile, Michael Chen had become something of an unexpected hero. Confined to a diplomatic research facility, he was systematically breaking down Carrick's communication protocols. His background in xenolinguistics gave him a unique perspective. He wasn't just analyzing their language, but the fundamental thought processes behind it. They think in absolute statements. Chen told Dr. Elena Rodriguez during a quantum-encrypted communication, "But we think in possibilities." The most effective weapon turned out to be human cultural expression itself. Musicians created sonic landscapes that contained hidden communication patterns. Visual artists generated images that confused computational analysis. Poets wrote verses that existed in multiple interpretative states simultaneously. A group of professional video game designers developed adaptive communication protocols that could shift meaning based on contextual understanding. These weren't just messages. They were living, evolving communication organisms. The Carricks began to experience something they had no framework to understand: cognitive fatigue. Their computational systems, designed for absolute efficiency, began to break down when confronted with information that couldn't be easily categorized or processed. Each attempt to understand human communication created more complexity, more uncertainty. Dr. Okuro's team tracked the psychological impact in real time. They weren't just defending. They were fundamentally reshaping the Carrick's understanding of intelligence itself. "We're teaching them a new way of thinking," she explained to her team. "Not through force, but through the most powerful tool we have, our capacity to create meaning." Quantum communication arrays picked up increasingly erratic transmissions from Carrick's command structures. Their language was beginning to fragment, their computational certainties dissolving in the face of human creativity. The invasion was being fought not with traditional weapons, but with the most powerful force humanity possessed: the ability to imagine beyond current limitations. And the Carrick's were discovering that some battles cannot be won through computational precision alone. The universe was about to learn that intelligence is far more than the ability to process information. It's the capacity to create meaning. The research facility beneath the Andes Mountains wasn't a military installation. It was an evolutionary crucible. Dr. Aria Mehta stood before a holographic projection that mapped the global human response in real time. What appeared to be a chaotic network was actually a sophisticated living system, each node representing not just an individual, but a potential point of innovation. "We're not fighting a war," she told her team of interdisciplinary researchers. "We're experiencing a species-wide transformation." The Carrick's had miscalculated fundamentally. They assumed conflict was about destruction. Humanity was treating it as an opportunity for collective evolution. Deep in the Pacific Ocean, a network of underwater research platforms began implementing a radical experiment. Marine biologists, quantum physicists, and neural network specialists were collaborating on something unprecedented, a method of distributed consciousness that could adapt faster than any computational system could predict. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez's team had discovered that human potential wasn't linear. It was fractal, each interaction creating multiple potential futures simultaneously. On the International Space Station, astronauts were no longer just observers. They had become living research nodes, their bodies and minds part of a global adaptive network. Microgravity research transformed into a living laboratory of human potential. Commander Elena Rodriguez received a quantum-encrypted transmission that defied traditional military communication protocols. It wasn't a message. It was a living piece of information that could reshape itself based on contextual understanding. The transmission came from an unexpected source: a collective of artists, programmers, and theoretical physicists who had been working in complete secrecy. Their project, known only as Nexus, was redefining the very concept of human collaboration. In the Sahara Desert, what appeared to be a standard research outpost was actually a sophisticated neural network testing ground. Researchers were exploring how human creativity could be amplified through technological symbiosis. Dr. Yuki Nakamura's breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. By studying the complex communication patterns of slime moles, organisms that could solve complex spatial problems without a central nervous system, her team discovered a new model of collective intelligence. "We're not a single organism," Nakamura explained to her colleagues. "We're a network of potential, constantly reforming, constantly adapting." The Carrick's invasion had become something entirely unexpected. What started as a military conflict was transforming into a species-wide evolutionary event. Michael Chen, still confined to his diplomatic research facility, was decoding something far more profound than alien communication. He was mapping the fundamental language of potential itself. "They see us as a problem to be solved," Chen noted in a private communication. "We see ourselves as a continuous process of becoming." Across the globe, educational systems were being reimagined in real time. Schools became adaptive learning environments that could shift their entire curriculum based on emerging global challenges. A child in Brazil might be simultaneously learning quantum physics, ecological restoration, and advanced communication theory. The most radical transformation was happening at the cellular level. Genetic researchers had discovered that human DNA wasn't a fixed blueprint, but a dynamic system of potential. The stress of the Carix invasion was triggering unprecedented adaptive responses. Humans were quite literally evolving in real time. Dr. Imani Okoro's psychological warfare team discovered something extraordinary. The collective human response was generating a form of emergent intelligence that couldn't be mapped by traditional computational models. We're not just resisting, Okoro noted. We're reimagining the very concept of resistance. The Carix computational networks began to experience something they had no framework to understand. Each attempt to analyze human behavior created more complexity, more uncertainty. Their invasion was becoming a catalyst for a transformation they could neither predict nor comprehend. In orbit, the space between human defensive platforms began to fill with something that wasn't quite technology, wasn't quite biology. A living network of potential that defied traditional understanding. The universe was about to witness something unprecedented. A species that didn't just adapt, but transformed conflict itself into an opportunity for collective growth. The moment of true transition began in a place nobody expected. A small research laboratory on the edge of the Atacama Desert. Dr. Sofia Alvarez wasn't a military strategist. She was a complexity theorist who had spent her entire career studying systems that existed at the edge of predictability. Her team had been working on something that most of her colleagues considered theoretical madness, a method of creating information networks that could spontaneously generate meaning. What they didn't realize was that they were about to change everything. The Carix invasion had pushed human potential to its absolute limit. Each attempt to understand or control humanity had only revealed deeper layers of complexity. Their computational systems were designed to analyze, to predict, to control. Humanity was something else entirely, a continuous process of becoming. In the quantum communication arrays that circled the planet, something unprecedented began to happen. The defensive networks that humans had created weren't just adaptive. They were alive in a way that defied traditional understanding of intelligence. Each interaction, each moment of conflict, was generating new potential, new ways of existing that the Carix computational matrices could not comprehend. Commander Elena Rodriguez watched from her mobile command center as the conflict transcended traditional warfare. The battle was no longer about territory or resources. It was about the fundamental nature of intelligence itself. Across the planet, human communities were responding in ways that seemed chaotic, but were actually highly sophisticated. A group of street artists in Tokyo developed communication protocols that could transmit complex strategic information through seemingly random graffiti patterns. Indigenous communities in the Amazon shared ecological knowledge that became sophisticated early warning systems. Michael Chen's linguistic research had uncovered something profound. The Carix saw language as a computational tool, a method of transferring precise information. Humans understood language as something far more fluid, a living, breathing entity that could create meaning beyond its literal interpretation. Dr. Yuki Nakamura's team had been studying the quantum entanglement of human consciousness. What they discovered was that human potential wasn't linear, it was fractal. Each individual was simultaneously a unique entity and part of a larger, interconnected system. The Carix invasion had become a catalyst for something unprecedented. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, marine biologists discovered that the complex communication networks of whale pods shared remarkable similarities with the distributed human response. It wasn't just humans who were demonstrating this adaptive potential. It was a fundamental property of complex living systems. Orbital observation platforms detected something that defied all known physical laws. The space around Earth was becoming something other than empty space. It was a living information network, a bridge between physical reality and potential. Dr. Aria Mehta's research into collective consciousness had reached a critical threshold. The human response to the Carix invasion was generating a form of emergent intelligence that couldn't be mapped by traditional computational models. We're not just defending, Mehta noted in her final research transmission. We're creating a new form of existence. The Carrick's computational networks began to experience total systemic failure. Each attempt to analyze human behavior created more complexity, more uncertainty. Their invasion was becoming a catalyst for a transformation they could neither predict nor comprehend. In the quantum communication arrays, something extraordinary happened. The defensive networks began to generate meaning spontaneously. Information became more than a transfer of data. It became a living, breathing entity. The line between technology, biology, and consciousness began to blur. Commander Zirax's final transmission was a series of computational equations that translated, roughly, to complete incomprehension. The Carricks had encountered something beyond their ability to understand, a form of intelligence that didn't just adapt, but continuously created new potential. Sofia Alvarez watched from her desert laboratory as the final transformation began. Humanity wasn't just surviving. It was becoming something entirely new. The universe would never be the same. The aftermath wasn't a victory in any traditional sense. It was a fundamental reimagining of existence itself. When the last Carrick's computational matrix collapsed, it didn't simply fail, it transformed. The quantum communication networks that humanity had developed during the conflict became something entirely unprecedented. A living bridge between consciousness and potential. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the orbital synthesis platform, watching as the fabric of space around Earth began to shimmer with possibilities. The conflict had been a crucible, burning away the limitations of human understanding. Michael Chen, no longer confined to diplomatic protocols, was now something else entirely. His work in xenolinguistics had evolved into a new form of communication that existed between language, mathematics, and pure potential. He understood now that communication was never about transferring information. It was about creating shared consciousness. The Galactic Council, which had once condemned humanity to extinction, now watched in a mixture of terror and fascination. The human response to the Carrick's invasion had rewritten every understanding of intelligence, conflict, and evolutionary potential. Dr. Sofia Alvarez's research laboratory in the Atacama had become something more than a scientific facility. It was now a nexus point, a place where the boundaries between individual consciousness, technological systems, and cosmic potential began to dissolve. We didn't just survive, Alvarez explained to the first interstellar diplomatic envoys. We became something new. The transformation wasn't just technological or biological. It was fundamental. Human cities were no longer fixed structures. They were living, breathing adaptive systems. A building in Tokyo could reconfigure itself based on the collective emotional state of its inhabitants. An agricultural system in Brazil could adjust its entire ecosystem in response to global environmental needs. The children born in the years following the conflict were different. Their neural networks seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. They could communicate in ways that blended technology, emotion, and pure potential. Dr. Yuki Nakamura's research into collective consciousness had revealed something profound. Humanity wasn't a collection of individuals. It was a living, breathing network of potential. Each person was simultaneously unique and part of a larger, interconnected system. The Carrick's computational remains became something unexpected. Rather than being destroyed, they were absorbed, transformed by the same adaptive networks that had defeated them. Their technological infrastructure became a new form of collective memory, a bridge between different ways of understanding existence. Interstellar communication networks that had once been tools of invasion were now platforms of shared exploration. The conflict had become a catalyst for a new form of cosmic understanding. Ambassador Michael Chen's first interstellar communication was nothing like traditional diplomatic language. It was a living transmission, part mathematical equation, part emotional landscape, part pure potential. Other species struggled to comprehend it, which was precisely the point. We are not here to conquer, the transmission suggested, though suggested was too weak a word. It was more an invitation to a new way of existing. We are here to explore the infinite potential of becoming. The orbital platforms around Earth were no longer simple observation points. They were living research networks, constantly generating new understanding. Quantum entanglement had become a form of communication, a way of sharing consciousness that transcended traditional limitations. Dr. Ariametta's final research project became the foundation of a new understanding of existence. The boundaries between individual consciousness, technological systems, and cosmic potential began to dissolve. Humanity had discovered something profound. Conflict was never about destruction. It was an opportunity for transformation. The universe watched and waited and began to understand that intelligence was far more complex than any single species had ever imagined. And somewhere, in the infinite potential between moments, something new was beginning.